Hello folks, Jason Cressman here, Grazing Acres Farms. You ever make your own poly steaks? You ever have freak accidents on the farm? You're not going to believe this story. Check this out. This little story or incident starts at the spring of 2017 when I decided to take some plastic conduit that I have and turn it into some semi-portable poly stakes. You can see I drilled a hole here at the top, took some galvanized wire, weaved through the hole, and then I made a little loop here for the poly wire to go in. They do not have push ends, and for that reason they are semi-portable. You have to use a hammer to install these. So what I do is I use these in pastures that are rather large, and I don't want to break down every time we move into them. I just leave the poly stakes there. All I have to do is run along and loop some poly wire on it, and we're ready to graze. So about midsummer of this year, I went to the farm to move the herd, and I'm setting up their next paddocks. And you know, it's pretty common that while you're doing this, the cows all come to the edge of the poly wire and the paddocks that they're at, and they stare at you and they watch you as you set up this next area. So I'm setting up the poly wire for their next paddocks, and I look over and I see them all standing there. And I thought, boy, that's strange. I don't remember one of these poly stakes being right there. But anyhow, didn't give it any thought. Went right back to setting up the paddocks. Got it all set up, and I moved the cattle in. So this is one of my favorite times of the day. I often sit on the four-wheeler and I watch them when they come into the paddocks and kind of look everybody over, listen to them crunch on that grass. It's very relaxing. So I'm sitting there watching all this go down, and I see a poly stake move, one of these. And I'm like, what in the world? Got up off my four-wheeler and I walked into the herd and started looking around. And sure enough, it moved again. This is what I seen. She's dragging the poly stake around with her, and somehow or another it's attached. After a closer look, it looks like this part that I've made as the loop for the poly wire has went up under her eyelid. So what I'm guessing has happened is this one of these poly stakes was set up in the paddocks that they were in. It didn't have poly wire on it, and she went to use it as a rubbing stake. And when she did, and she brought her head down and came up, this little downward pointing part of the loop went down under her eyelid and it caught. And from there, she lifted her head, pulling about 5 to 6 inches of the stake out of the ground, and she carried it with her. Now I'm standing there shaking my head looking at this like, oh my God, how are we going to get that off? Well, my first go-to is to pick up my phone and to call the owner, tell him what's going on. He says, you know, this time of the day, it's getting late. I guess my suggestion is that you just leave her alone. Don't mess with it any. Maybe overnight she'll move her head the right direction and she'll pop it out. Hey, that sounds great. Let's hope that happens. Fingers are crossed. So that's the plan. So I go home, come back the next morning, hoping and praying that this will be laying in the pasture somewhere and she's not carrying it around with her. But when you got my luck, good things never happen. Seldomly happen, and she's still carrying this around with her. So from there, I called the owner again, told him what was going on, and he gave me instructions. Go ahead and sort her out, walk her to the corral, and from there, I'll come down later this afternoon, and we'll go ahead and remove it. Sounds like a good plan. So I sorted her out and I walked her roughly eighth of a mile, quarter of a mile, I don't know, a pretty decent little distance back to the corral. Well, it just so happens that in the corral, we've got a steer that has a rear leg issue, and I am feeding him hay. But because I didn't want him to be alone, I gave him another steer as a buddy, so he had a little partner to stay up there with him. So this heifer that has this stuck in her eye is going to join these two. So I get her up there, and I leave her there for the remainder of the day. Later that afternoon, the owner shows up with his father, and we get her in the head cage. And the plan is, now that she's in the head cage, is to take a pair of these PVC cutters and to simply cut the PVC pipe down to just a short little piece, so she ain't got all of that weight pulling on her eyelid. We're also hoping that it'll make it easier to just grab the little piece and remove. So the owner asked me, he says, now do you feel that you can just reach over there and grab that and lift it away? And I'm looking at it and I'm like, boy, I just don't know. At this point, she's done carried 2 or 3 pounds on her eyelid, bouncing around like this, and she runs. This is bouncing. She lifts her head up high. She's lifting all this weight up off the ground. And at this point, all of that weight has done made the end of this loop protrude through her eyelid, and it's now poking out. So I'm like looking at it, and I'm like, wow, I don't know if we'll be able to just lift it straight out. So him being the brave one, he reaches over and grabs it and lifts, and sure enough, it lifts right out. She's now got a little white spot where it came through. Kind of looks like maybe it's a little infected. The under part of the eyelid is really swollen. We are an organic farm. We don't use any antibiotics or anything of that sort. We are, however, a big fan of Crystal Creek's wound spray. It's all natural. It's essential oils and different things of that sort. And it works really well. And it's also able to be used around the eye. So before we let her out of the head cage, we gave her a couple good sprays of that wound spray right in the eye and the open wound, and then we released her. And my instruction from the owner was, for the next few days, when you see her over at the feeder eating with the other 2 steers, maybe sneak up and try and give her a couple good sprays right in the eye. Well, that worked for about 2 days, and then after that she got educated and knew what I was up to, and from there it wasn't possible to get close to her again. Whenever I would approach the feeder or her, she would simply just go the other way. So I didn't want to put any pressure on her and cause her to be a spookish type heifer, so I left her alone at that point. I didn't see that the swelling was getting any bigger. It was actually starting to go down after about day 3. So I felt comfortable not spraying her. About 2-3 weeks later, she'd healed up completely, and we released her back with the herd. So I guess what I'm trying to say here, folks, is if you make your own equipment to use on the farm, keep a close eye on it. You just never know what could happen, and if something is going to happen, it's best to be aware as soon as it happens, or as close to the time of it happening as possible. Since this incident, I've made changes myself to where I no longer leave these poly stakes in the pasture with the cows unless they have poly wire on them. It seems to be that if they have poly wire on them and they're hot, the cows have no interest of rubbing on them. So it's either that or pull them out and then hammer them back in when I need to use them. But at the same time, that is a lot easier than going through all these steps I had to and risking the health of one of our cows or heifers. So I hope you enjoyed this little story. It was kind of graphic. I hope I didn't turn your stomachs any. But at the same time, I felt it was necessary to point out accidents do happen on the farm. So I hope you liked the video, and if so, you'll throw it a big thumbs up. That'll help boost it in the YouTube search ranks and make it easier for other grazers to find. I'd also like to welcome you to share this video with any of your grazing friends. If you haven't subscribed, please take time to do so, and make sure you click on the little bell so that you get notified when I release new videos. Thanks for watching Grazing Acres Farms, and we'll see you next week, folks.